Good evening, everyone. My name is Yandisa Hene, and I'd like to welcome you to today's lesson session. Today, we'll be discussing a very relevant and very important topic for SMMEs. We'll be discussing financial support available for SMMEs with Mr. Don Mashele, who is the Head of Business Development Impact Support at the Small Enterprise Financial Agency. SMMEs are the lifeblood of the South African economy. Unfortunately, they are also the most at risk. Many were already dealing with a contracting economy, then COVID hit and dealt them a devastating blow. A study done by McKinsey predicted that around 60% of SMMEs will close before the crisis is over. While still dealing with COVID-19, SMMEs were further dealt a blow a few weeks ago with the unrest and the looting that took place in the South African provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. So it is basically in the light of these unprecedented times that I felt that it was incredibly important on behalf of SMMEs to have this conversation with Mr. Don Mashele, who is tasked with the responsibility of promoting the small enterprise financial agencies offerings to the financial offerings to the SMME sector. Good evening, Mr. Mashele. How are you doing today?
Good evening, Yandisa. I'm doing well and hope you're doing well too.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you for coming onto this platform for such an important conversation. And to all the listeners that have logged on, just to let you know that we will be having a Q&A at the end, so you can send through all your questions. Now, let's get into it. Mr. Mashele, you know, SEFA is an organization that some SMMEs don't know about. So I think before we even go into any of the programs, I'd just like to know what is SEFA? What does SEFA do? But I think most importantly, why should every single SMME in South Africa know about SEFA?
Good evening once again, Yandisa, and good evening to all the entrepreneurs on the call. Small Enterprise Finance Agency. We are an implementing agency of the Department of Small Business Development. So under the Department of Small Business Development, you've got two implementing agencies, ourselves, the SEFA, and our sister agency, Small Enterprise Development Agency. Our primary mandate as SEFA is to provide what we call development finance to SMMEs and cooperatives. And our sister organization provides non-financial support. So anything non-financial in terms of training, etc., business development services are provided by our sister agency, Small Enterprise Development Agency. Our primary mandate, like I said, is to provide development finance. And why should SMMEs, entrepreneurs, come to SEFA or know about SEFA? It's because when we talk development finance, we're talking the type of finance that is developmental in nature. And by that, I mean the funding that we provide. We provide funding for startup businesses or entrepreneurs who want to expand their businesses or entrepreneurs who want to acquire businesses. But in the process of doing that, we have got developmental outcomes that we would like to achieve. For instance, the issue of job creation, the issue of targeting what we call priority target groups, such as women-owned and managed businesses, businesses owned by entrepreneurs with disabilities, businesses owned by young people, and businesses operating in those spaces where it's difficult to attract commercial lending. And there we're talking about township and rural areas. So SEFA is there to provide that additionality to touch those spaces that are neglected by your private lenders, as it were.
Okay, that's great. I think, Mr. Mashele, all those groups that you've mentioned, women, people with disabilities, startups, those are all vulnerable groups. And when COVID hit, they definitely would have been impacted, obviously, more than the larger organizations. So in response to COVID, I know that the Department of Small Business Development and its agencies, SEFA, which is you, the financial agency, and CEDA, which provides obviously the training, launched a number of interventions. So please, can you take us through the various programs that were launched as interventions for companies that were impacted by SEFA and those that are still relevant as we sit today, as we are still under lockdown?
So when it comes to the DSBD portfolio, so when I talk about DSBD portfolio, I'm talking about the department, SEED and SEFA. In terms of the response to COVID, when COVID started about a year and some couple of months ago, we launched 2 programs. There was one program called the Debt Relief Scheme. And the Debt Relief Scheme, we were assisting businesses that were struggling. Remember when we're still under the hard lockdown levels and the economic activity, it was non-existent, if I may say, for SMMEs, for the majority of SMMEs. So we were implementing at that time the Debt Relief Scheme. And the Debt Relief Scheme was assisting businesses that were struggling to make ends meet in terms of some of their working capital requirements, to pay your rates and taxes, to pay your landlord for rent, to pay salaries, those type of things. So it was a relief scheme that was launched and for struggling businesses. So I think let's understand that it was for those businesses that were finding it difficult to cope.
Okay.
Now, that scheme, what happened was we had a budget of about 530 million plus minus, and then it was subscribed. I mean, it was overly subscribed, and within a very, very short period of time, we had approved, disbursed most of the funding, and the scheme was subsequently closed. So if there's anyone on the call who had applied for that scheme doesn't exist. It was then, it was launched, like I said, when COVID hit. Linked to that, there was another scheme called the business growth. Because remember now, with the issues of COVID, there were businesses that were struggling, the majority of the SMMEs. However, there are certain businesses that actually saw an opportunity because those type of business were providing commodities that were assisting us as a country to fight the pandemic. For instance, when you think in terms of someone who is in a business of manufacturing sanitizers, as an example, you know, those businesses, they saw an opportunity, and there are many others that saw that opportunity. So for those, we're providing a business growth facility to then say, there is an opportunity, and then we're providing the business growth. So those were the relief measures that we did when COVID hit at that time. But now, when the issues of the lockdown was relaxed and the economy was beginning to open up, then the portfolio, the SBD portfolio, came with the recovery programs. And some of the recovery programs was then to say, there are certain SMMEs that won't just easily come back to the market and be able to operate. And those SMMEs will be in the township and rural areas. So we came with certain relief programs, which we'll unpack later. But I think the point to make now is that the debt relief scheme was there, but it doesn't exist as we speak, and it is oversubscribed and is utilized the budget that we had.
So, Mr. Mashele, so I hear you, there were programs that were launched, obviously oversubscribed, discontinued, and a few recovery programs were introduced. That's what I'm hearing. So now, if I'm an SMME sitting in on this call, and maybe I wasn't necessarily impacted by COVID, but I've just launched a business, let's say 3 months ago in March or in April, and I would still like to get assistance as a startup, as you know, as a startup business. Are those funds available to those SMMEs, or are we still primarily dealing with funds targeted at people that were impacted by COVID?
Okay. Remember now that when the economy opened, SEFA, when COVID hit at that time, we had suspended our normal lending programs. So we're busy administering the relief schemes, etc. But when the economy opened up, we then brought back the programs, our SEFA, our normal lending program. So if there's an SMME on a call who is saying, I was not impacted by COVID, but I'm looking for normal SEFA funding, that funding is available. And I think details are on the website. I don't think we'll have time to talk about each and every program, but SEFA normal program where we provide funding from as little as 50,000 to a maximum of 15 million, those programs are there. But let me also hesitate to talk about another scheme that we have launched called the Small Enterprise Manufacturing Support Program.
Okay.
So that scheme is a blended finance program, and it's targeted at businesses that are in the manufacturing sector. The reason being that part of the recovery or of understanding that we need to support SMMEs to take advantage of the situation that we find ourselves in. Remember now, one of the things around the issue of COVID is that it has disrupted the international supply chains, you know, and that gives us an opportunity as a country to then say, we must just rethink how we do things. We must start localizing most of the things that we do and be dependent on our SMMEs. As we're saying, I mean, we normally say that SMMEs are the vanguard of the economy, etc. So we then need to take a dedicated approach that says, let's support those SMMEs that are in manufacturing. So this scheme, it's a combination of a loan and a grant. You can get a maximum of about 20% by way of a grant, and the maximum loan amount, we're talking about 15 million rand. And it's for businesses that are in the manufacturing sector, because what we are driving localization, and that's the scheme to support those type of businesses that are in the manufacturing sector.
That's great. I'm actually happy to hear about the localization, which is, obviously being driven also by the manufacturing scheme. So if I'm in manufacturing and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I would really like to apply for this program, I think maybe two things that would come into consideration. The first is, how do I actually go about applying for this program? And what are the qualifying criteria in terms of the number of months or years that I need to have been in business? So I think that would be information that's important to share, because I'm sure there are some SMMEs that are in manufacturing on this call.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think high level, let me talk about what are the basic eligibility criteria. One is we're talking about the business must be owner managed, for all the programs that we support, or the SMMEs that we support, we encourage that owner managed businesses. It must be compliant in terms of, CIPC registration, SARS, and those type of things. So anything that talks about compliance, those businesses have to be compliant. And it must be 100% owned by South African citizens. And then we're also saying that the business must operate within the borders of the country, and that is for all the SEFA programs. That is what we do. And 70% of the workers have to be South African, and the 30%, if not South African, we're saying those are the workers must have the valid work permits. And we're also saying, because we necessarily don't do startups under these programs, it can't, unless it's a startup with a very solid offtake or a solid letter of intent, because it's manufacturing. Remember now, manufacturing is business to business transactions. So we need to be sure that when we invest in a business and acquire machinery, equipment, and working capital, it must be a business that has got potential to be sustainable. So we're saying at least be in business for 2 years. If not, if it's a startup business, it must be backed by a solid offtake agreements or letters of intent.
Okay, so Mr. Mashele, whilst we're still on criterias, I've seen some of the criterias of some of the programs. Some of the criterias are, for instance, your taxes must be up to date. There's certain documentation that you must have. And sometimes in case of a loan, you have to showcase an ability to repay the loan. Now, someone else can argue that two things. One is, well, I wouldn't be coming to SEFA if I didn't need this financing. So maybe my tax may not necessarily be up to date, or maybe, without the support, I won't be able to expand the business so that I can make more money. And some companies, honestly, are in the rural areas, they're in townships, they are semi-informal, they probably don't really necessarily have the recommended documentation. So all of this can, if I'm sitting in the township and, I've just come out of varsity and I've started this business, it's been going for a year, all of this could be a barrier to actually accessing SEFA funding. So has SEFA done anything to take into, or ease actually the barriers of entrepreneurs accessing some of the funding for township rural entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So Yandisa, you spot on, because when you look at the programs that we're talking about, we are targeting businesses that are not necessarily funding ready, if I may say. They still need some hand holding, some or most of them, before they can access the SEFA funding. So that is where our sister organization SEDA comes in. As I was saying, that we work as a portfolio, because when you check the suite of offerings that are offered by our sister organization SEDA, it covers that support. So SEDA is the one that prepares businesses for funding readiness and then bring them up to SEFA for funding. So we are not saying that the business must just go out there and look for that type of assistance. That assistance is available within the portfolio. And the beauty about working with SEDA is that SEDA has got a larger network of of offices, more than SEFA. So when you check the SEDA website and you check the footprint in terms of the network, SEDA has got a branch office in each and every district or municipality. So, so the issue of accessibility becomes easier in that way. And also both SEDA and ourselves, we do work with the local government in terms of the local economic development offices to then say, we're not expecting businesses to travel to this branch offices if your business happen to be in the outlying areas. It can be through an LED office or it can be through a SEDA office, but that support is provided by SEDA to make sure that businesses that we target are funding ready. The issue of affordability, it's actually crucial, because at the same time, we don't want to be irresponsible and provide loans to businesses that can't afford those type of loans. You're creating a problem and you're creating a hazard. So we make sure that we prepare those businesses. By the time they come to us, the issue of affordability is there by the support that is provided by SEDA.
So I think you've mentioned two important things. I think the first one then is for, so it's SEFA, which is the financial funding, and SEDA, which actually is more the coaching, getting you business ready, documentation, training. So if I'm an entrepreneur, is it best to then approach SEDA, who then can maybe get me into SEFA, or should I approach SEFA directly? Because I think that's what I'd be thinking right now is, okay, I may not have all my documentation ready. I may not have all my tax in order. So should I rather go to SEDA so that they can assist me with all of that before I approach SEFA?
Yeah, it becomes a judgment call from an entrepreneur. Because I'm sure as an entrepreneur, your level of readiness in a way, because remember now, in terms of what we're saying, I've just indicated here that one of the things that we check, you must have a solid business plan, if it's a startup business, et cetera, and the criteria and all those type of things. Now, if you know that you don't have certain documentation and you can't get that documentation, then you can then say, I'd approach SEDA. Because remember now, when you look at our application form, and it's got a checklist. So that checklist is clear in terms of the things that we require. So it's like writing an exam. When after writing, you know exactly whether you've made it or not made it. So if you look at our application form and say, okay, now I've completed this application form, they're looking for these 10 documents. I do have the 10 documents. Then straight you can come to us. But if you say, no, I don't have the 2 documents, but these documents are not so difficult, I can get them using my own resources, whatever the case is, then you can come to us. But if you're saying, I need to be assisted with certain things like registration, CIPC, I don't have the resources to do that, then you go to SEDA, because they pay for the service that SEDA that they provide. So it's a judgment call, but check our application form, check the look at the checklist, and make a call to then say, do you have resources to afford some of the things that we require by way of compliance? If the answer is yes, then come to us, we'll assist. If the answer is no, then go to SEDA. They'll be able to subsidize some of the interventions.
Okay, I'm actually, to be honest, Mr. Mashele, I was not aware of this before this call, so I've learned something, and I'm hoping that the over 150 people that we have on this call, I've also got that. So everyone, if you don't have all the relevant documentation or don't qualify for SEFA yet, go to SEDA and obviously get the coaching and the necessary documentation and they can assist you and direct you not only to SEFA, but to other financial institutions as well. So I hope everyone has got that. Mr. Mashele, there is the Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program. And I'm sure that we do have people from the township or from the rural areas. Can you just tell us about that program, because they're also the most vulnerable?
Yeah. So the Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, for short, we call it TRAP. These are the programs that we developed as a portfolio to assist businesses that operate in township and rural areas. Because remember now the issue of COVID, when COVID hit and the economy was kind of closed through those hard levels of lockdown. And when the economy started to open up, like I said before, we can't just assume that businesses will just immediately come back and start operating, particularly those that are in those spaces, your township and rural areas. So what we then did as a portfolio is then to say, when you talk about township or rural economy, what do we actually mean? Because for the past period, you know, the issue of township economy, it was a bit intangible in a way. To say, okay, what do we actually mean when we talk about township economy or rural economy, like I said? So what we then did is to develop interventions, financial support and non-financial support, targeted at certain subsectors of businesses that operate in townships. So we have got a blended finance from the financial support point of view. We've got blended finance that we provide, a combination of a loan and a grant. And in the interest of time, I won't go through each and every scheme, but the principle around how those programs were developed. So most of the programs, the amount of funding that we provide is a maximum of 350,000 rand, of which 50,000 of that can be a grant and the balance can be a loan. So most of them are designed like that in terms of the threshold, but there are those that differ in terms of the threshold. For instance, we've got another one for the sponsorship support program, where the maximum, I mean, it's about 15 million rand. 7% of that can be a grant, and then 30% of that can be a loan. And we have got the ones for personal care, Masalo, there we're talking about a 50,000 rand. 50% of that can be a grant, 50% can be a loan. So what I'm saying is that we have got those businesses, and those are the thresholds, and we provide that blended finance. The blended finance, like I said, is a combination of a loan and a grant. And the loan portion of that fetches a lower interest rate of about 5%, linked to the financial support that we provide. Again, our sister organization provide business development support, because it's one thing to provide funding to these businesses, but linked to that, you must provide funding with support, because we need to look after the businesses. We need to make sure that we mentor, we coach them, they are compliant, such that when we go there a year after the funding, those businesses are still there and they are growing. So that is that in terms of the TRAP programs, but you've got details on our website in terms of how to qualify, how to apply, those type of things.
So what is the SEFA website, the link?
So the website, the SEFA website is www.sefa.org.za.
Okay, so I think everyone heard www.sefa, which is SEFA.org.za. Correct. Okay, I hope everyone has got that. If you're interested in, if you're from the township or the rural areas and you would like to apply for the program. Now, Mr. Mashele, it's almost like these crises just, they don't stop. They just keep on coming for SMMEs. And obviously, we're still in lockdown, but unfortunately, there was unrest that happened a few weeks ago in KZN and in Gauteng. So looking at that, was there anything that SEFA actually introduced to assist? I mean, currently, I think there's about, in Durban alone, in KZN, 45,000 businesses were impacted by the recent lootings, which is a lot of businesses, and a lot of families dependent on those businesses. So is there anything that SEFA has actually, any interventions or any programs for anyone here from that may have been impacted by the lootings?
Yes, again, the Department of Small Business Development Portfolio, SEFA, SEDA, and the department, because of the crisis, unfortunate crisis that we've just experienced in the past period, we had to develop interventions to support those businesses. Again, the intervention is financial and non-financial. So let me start with the financial side of things. We launched what we call the Business Recovery Support Program. Now, the Business Recovery Support Program, it's targeted at assisting those businesses that were affected in the formal sector. By formal sector, we're talking about businesses operating in the malls and they're formalized and those type of things. So we have introduced that program. Again, it's a blended finance instrument. The maximum loan, the maximum facility that you can get is 2 million rands. Out of that, 60% can be a grant or is a grant, and then 40% is a loan. So you can see now how we are balancing it out, because this is more of it's weighed heavily on the grant side, being 60%, and the loan is 40%, and that 40% again fetches a 5% interest rate, and we're assisting businesses that were affected by the recent looting. So the application forms, again, that they're on our website, both the SEDA and the SEFA website. You can go in there, you can get the application form. It's got at the back of the application form, it unpacks the scheme in terms of who qualifies, such that when you read that product leaflet, we are able to tick the boxes to then say, when I read this 2-pager, I do qualify for this funding, and there's a 2-pager simple application form, because we can't complicate the application process for these businesses. We need to move with speed. Yeah. So they can apply, and then we do have a dedicated email address which those application forms need to be sent with the attaching documents. And I will read the email address. It's very much important. It's brp@sefa.org.za. Let me repeat, BRP for Business Recovery Package @sefa.org.za. So that Yandisa is for the Business Recovery Support Program. Now, for informal traders, because informal traders were also affected, we've got another intervention. Now, this is a grant. We're not expecting any repayment. It's a grant of about 3,000 rand, and this is administered through one of our banking partners. We've partnered with Nedbank to administer the disbursement of this grant, because what is important, even though it's a grant, we need to be responsible. We need to make sure that when you apply, you tick the boxes in terms of you qualifying for that particular grant. So Nedbank work with associations. So you don't approach Nedbank as an individual. Nedbank would work with associations, because remember now, with association, there can be one association that has got about 100 members, as an example. So it's easy to do the accreditation and the checking of those members, and it becomes easy to disperse those grants. So those are the two interventions programs that were launched. And again, here we need to appreciate the agility of the department to say, within a very short space of time, within a space of 2 years, we came with so many programs, because it can't be business as usual. You need to sit back and say, you're supporting entrepreneurs, and in the way you approach your your work as a department, as agencies, you need to respond to what the market is looking for. So those are the programs that we have launched to address the challenges that we face because of the recent looting.
It was actually in a space of a year, not even 2 years. So that's really great. So Mr. Mashele, let's say I'm sitting in Joburg. Lootings happened in, let's say I'm sitting in Cape Town. Lootings happened in Durban. And even though my business may not have been ransacked, but I get some supplies from Durban, where a business was looted there. Would someone like that qualify for a business recovery program where your business may not necessarily have been burnt down or looted directly, but indirectly by virtue of the fact that you are doing business with a business in Cape Town? So would a business like that qualify for a business recovery program or the grant program?
No, unfortunately not, because that's a supply chain issue. We only look at businesses that are based in KZN, prioritize actually. Businesses in KZN and Gauteng, and there could be other provinces where people can say we were also affected, but they must prove that. And the way to prove that, the application form and the criteria that we have there actually details how to prove that. Remember also what we are funding through this instrument, particularly the business recovery package, we're financing assets. We're financing assets and working capital. So someone who the supply chain was affected, it's just the issue of profitability and the supply and the turnovers and stuff. But in terms of tangible stuff, they were not affected by way of losing assets, because the program supports CAPEX, the capital expenditure, your assets, your equipment, your fixtures and fittings, and to some extent the working capital. So those businesses, unfortunately, now we won't be able to cover.
Okay. So, Mr. Mashele, I think I'm going to go to a number of, so guys, I see that there have been questions we've got over 15 questions now that have been asked, and we received some via email. So I will just go through a few of the questions, and ones that popped up quite consistently across the board. The first one that we received was, how long does it take for financing to be approved? Because some people say they've been waiting for a while for their applications to be approved. So how long does it take for an application to be approved? And if it's been, so I think that's the first question, Mr. Mashele.
Okay. So in terms of our turnaround times, let me talk about the normal turnaround times that we have at SEFA. Let's say, for instance, because what we do also, we've got what you call contract financing. Someone comes to SEFA, they're looking for funding, they're having a contract. That's an easier transaction to do in a way, because someone already has a contract. You don't do a lot of due diligence as a deal-making team. So those transactions, if you give us all supporting documents, and I must underline all supporting documentation, you're looking at about 15 working days from application to approval. Disbursement has got another maybe 2 weeks or so, depending on the securities that you provide. So for contract financing, supposed to be 15 working days. Someone who does not have a contract and they're coming to SEFA, they're looking for a term loan, and we need to analyze business plans, we need to do due diligence and those type of things. That takes a little bit longer. Now you can be looking there about 30 to 40 working days by way of turnaround time. However, I must acknowledge that there will be certain businesses who can say we have been waiting for longer than that, and that's the reality. So in that case, we do have a unit which fortunately the team that I come from, is responsible for that part, the customer relations management team, where you can then say, this is me, I've been waiting for so many months, whatever the case is, you just drop me an email, and then we look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I've got confidence I can leave my email address if you allow Yandisa after this, and then let people drop me an email so that we become practical about how we do these things. It's not like you do it tonight, tomorrow, and then you've disappeared. So I'll leave my email address. If someone says, no, we've heard you said that you did this, but I've been waiting for 2 months. So I will leave my email address towards the end of this, and then just drop me an email, and then we'll take it from there on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so I think everyone that's on the call, we clearly have the right person in this webinar. If your applications, you've submitted everything, just make sure you've submitted everything. You've been waiting for over maybe 3 months and you haven't heard anything, and it needs to be escalated. The department that you can escalate it to is Mr. Mashele's department, and at the end of the call, he will leave his email address. Right. Okay. So, Mr. Mashele, there's a question that came through from, I think it's the person is Matsidi. So I see here, and it's quite a relevant question. They're actually asking, it's Matsidi Somfanta, what about people in the creative space? Because we've spoken about manufacturing, we've spoken about spaza shops, we've spoken, but nothing about people in the creative space. So what about people in the creative space? Where does that leave them?
Yeah, no, it's quite a good question. You're right. What we don't have, and I must be honest, we don't have a dedicated instrument for SMMEs in the creative space, but they can qualify for our normal SEFA funding. You know, remember now we do have normal SEFA funding that we don't have tailored programs for. Now,
Okay.
the challenge now with that is because we've been approached by some of the entrepreneurs in the space. Remember now when we talk about the issue of, okay, give us your business plan. Remember, SEFA, again, what we do, we provide debt funding. We don't provide equity. Now, when you come to SEFA and say, I'm looking for a loan, we look at your business plan and then ask ourselves a question, where are the cash flows going to come from for you to repay the loan? Now, once you start saying, okay, I'm in the creative space, maybe I'm working with the television stations, whatever the case is, the issue is, you then need to then say, give us your cash flow projections. If you are applying for a loan where it must be repaid in 5 years, as an example, then you then have to give us cash flow projections for the next 5 years and say, this is how I'm going to be making my money. If we are convinced, then you'll get the funding. But if we're not convinced, then that's where it becomes a bit of a challenge. So I think the issue of the creative space industry, the ones that we have seen, that becomes a bit of a challenge. But if you've got a contract with the public broadcaster, as an example, and we know that if you get this production, now you'll be getting regular payments from the public broadcaster. By all means, you can easily get SEFA funding. It's not a dedicated program, but you can qualify for the funding that we have, which is normal SEFA funding, like I said.
Okay, so Mr. Mashele, the questions are flying in. I'm really hoping we can get through. I thought we were only going to do 3 questions, but I think we actually need more. I think people really have a lot of questions here. So someone says, apart from all the funding available, do you find, I actually think this is an important one, do you fund franchises? So whether it's a franchise in food, in garages, that came from Wesley Peter, are franchises funded by SEFA?
Yes, we do. We do fund franchises. We've got quite a number of franchises in our book. But remember now, when it comes to franchising, most franchises, because I think that I need to make this distinction. Most franchises, before you can apply for funding, they will say to you they need what they call unencumbered capital. And by unencumbered capital, let's take a simple example. You want to apply for XYZ franchise, it costs R1 million. Now they'll say to you, okay, fine, we can give you a store that you can own. It costs about R1 million, but 200,000 must be unencumbered. What it means is that 200,000 must come from you. You can't borrow the 200,000. You can borrow the 800,000 from SEFA, but you can't borrow the 200,000. So that is where franchising becomes tricky, because people might have this understanding that the unencumbered capital is the requirement of a lender, and it's not. You know, it's a requirement of the franchisor who will say, you can borrow the balance, but part of it must be your own equity or investment in the business. So, but we can fund franchises if you are in that space and you've been accredited by the franchisor. You can tick all the boxes, including the unencumbered portion of the funding that I'm talking about. But yeah, we do fund franchises.
And Mr. Mashele, just for my own interest, actually, with this franchise, though I'm not going into franchises, but you know, it would be easier to, if I'm someone who has no money like right now, it would be easier to approach someone and say, you know, SEFA is giving me 800,000. Therefore, can you give me 200 or can I raise the 200,000? The expectation is not that I must come with 200,000 already in my hand and then only then will I be given 800,000. Can SEFA give a guarantee to say, we're giving you 800,000 and we will release it if you can raise the 200?
Yeah, what we can do, we can give what you call a letter of intent, because so most franchises will then say, okay, fine, we hear you. This is R1 million. You are saying SEFA will look at funding the 800,000. Can you get some form of a letter of intent from SEFA to say that if you tick all boxes, viability, etc., you will get the 800,000. So we can give that letter of intent, but the onus will be on you to go and raise the 200,000. So we can't release the 800,000 unless you've got everything in one roof, and then you're able to then invest the whole full amount, and then you get the franchise. So what I'm saying, yes, we can get that letter of intent that can assist your application with the franchisor.
So, Mr. Mashele, I know with all these programs, they're great, they're nice, but ultimately, people need to be able to access the people inside the organization. And I don't want to name and shame, which I can give you the details after this. There is someone who has sent me a question here in the chat, and they've said that a particular province, the SEFA there, they can never get a hold of them. This province, they don't respond to calls, they don't respond to anything. And this person is actually question mark, as in this is the challenge we are having in this particular province. Maybe I can even name the province. Maybe there's other people who are having the same experience. I don't know. So what do we do in a situation like this where people are hungry, people want access to these things, but just people are working from home, not responding? What do they do in instances like that?
Yeah, I think as I said earlier on, that the team that I work with, we don't only deal with turnaround time issues. Any customer complaint that you have, you direct that my way, and that's the email address that I'm going to leave after this, so that we're able to unblock whatever things that are happening in the system. So I think the beauty that we do have that unit, the dedicated team of to deal with customer relations, complaints, and appeals, and everything like that. But like I said before, I would leave the email address to engage with those entrepreneurs on outside of the court. But yeah, I think let's use that email address that I leave.
Okay, Mr. Mashele, I know I'm only supposed to have your time for 30 minutes. I know you are passionate about SMMEs. I am passionate about SMMEs. The questions are actually flying in. So clearly people are, if we can just bear with us whilst I go through some of the additional questions, because I really want this to be a session for entrepreneurs to get as much information as they can. I think another question that has come up a number of times in the chat is electronic submissions. So people are saying there's two parts to this. Is one, is there a way that all of this can be done electronically where people don't have to print the documents, fill in the documents? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is there a way in which people can get acknowledgement once their application is submitted? Some people are saying, yeah, we don't get acknowledgement when our documents are submitted.
Okay, let me start with the first one, the issue of electronic submissions. We, on our website, we've got a pre-screening portal. So if you go on a SEFA website, it says apply for finance, it then pre-screen your business. So because now I think someone is sitting on a call and saying, I'm not so sure whether I would qualify for SEFA funding, etc., etc. So if you go on a website, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, ask deeper questions about your business, and then it will pre-screen you. If you are eligible to apply for SEFA funding, now that portal will give you access to our application form, which you can download, complete, and email that form to the nearest regional office of where your business is operating. So that is how far we can go in terms of electronic documentation. We actually encourage that because we don't encourage, entrepreneurs to physically visit the offices because of the situation we find ourselves in around COVID issues. So the issue of electronic submissions, yes, we encourage that.
Yes.
And the beauty about the portal is that if for whatever reason you are not eligible to apply for SEFA funding, that portal is built with the requirements of other lenders in the SME financing space. So, for instance, I said SEFA maximum is 50 million. Let's say you go in there and say, I'm looking for 20 million as an example. Obviously, it won't give you a form that says you are eligible to apply for SEFA funding. However, because the portal is built with the requirements of other lenders, both DFIs and private sector, banks, etc., it will then say SEFA does not have an instrument that can support you. However, you can approach the likes of the IDC as an example. So I think it's a worthwhile thing because it doesn't leave you frustrated. It can give you other options in an event where SEFA can assist. So I think I'll encourage people to use that portal. The second question of acknowledgement, yeah, I think it's not for the first time we're hearing about this. And it's not an excuse to say that people are busy, etc., etc. You know, it's, yeah, and I know I keep repeating myself, sounding like a broken record to say any type of complaint that you have, send it my way. I think that will fall under that category as well. So anything that you're not happy about the SEFA service, the SEFA service, drop me that email. We'll start as early as tomorrow to keep the team busy to address any type of complaints that people have.
Thank you, Mr. Mashele. I hope everyone because another province was then now called out over and above that. So it seems like it's, a few provinces have been called out, and I know that your department is definitely in a position to assist entrepreneurs. One of the questions from Solomon Mashele is, what will happen if I fail to pay back the money when it's due, if I'm successful to get the TRIP money?
Yeah. So remember I said we're a development financial institution. The first thing that we'll do is try to work with you to restructure the business. So we've got a dedicated team. Maybe what I did not say is that what we also do, once we fund a business, we provide mentorship. If we realize that, okay, now this business has got this gap where the entrepreneur may not have capacity to do certain things, we provide mentorship. And that is the grant that you get to make sure that you run a sustainable business. So, but linked to the question that has been asked, if the business cannot repay the loan, it then means therefore something went wrong in the business. And then we're saying we've got a team that will do work out and restructuring. They'll come and work with you, see if we can restructure the loan and repurpose the business if it can happen that way. Then that is the first thing. Because what we're interested in doing is to save the jobs that are there, to save your business as an entrepreneur. Now, the issue of foreclosing businesses it's a last resort. When we realize that there is nothing that can be done and there's no business. I'm sure as an entrepreneur you get to a point where you're saying I myself must cut my losses and just move on. But that becomes, like I said, the last resort. The thing that we do is work out on restructuring, and we do as much as we can to save businesses.
Okay. Then Mr. Mashele, an anonymous asked the closing date for the business recovery support. There's a lot of people from Durban actually asking questions on the business recovery support. It's stated as the 20th of August, which is, I think, next week, Friday. Will SEFA consider extending this date to allow SMMEs to put together all the required documentation? Or is that it? If you missed that wave, unfortunately, you've missed that wave. Do we know if that will be extended at all at this point?
Okay, let me answer that question in two parts. So the first thing is, like I said, there is that email address. You go onto our website and check what are the requirements. So the first thing to do is when you submit an application, make sure that you tick all boxes in terms of documentation. It's very simple documentation, I must be honest with you. And then once you have applied in the system, we will then, even after the closure, we'll just make sure that we can assist those type of businesses. Remember now that the programs that I've just shared here are the ones that are done by the Department of Small Business Development, SEFA, and SEDA. However, when you check the relief programs, the recovery programs that were launched by DTIC as well, administered by the IDC and the NEF, we can still channel some of the applications if they qualify in case we
Yes.
run out of money, you know what I'm saying? So the issue of whether it will be, when it's closed, whether it will still be reopened, it's something that I'm sure SEFA management will have to sit down and say, we have got so many applications and a lot of businesses were not assisted. I'm sure that is where we just go back to the drawing board to then say, what do we do with this kind of situation? But for now, I think let's work on the date that we have, make sure that we submit applications, tick all boxes, and see if we can be assisted. I must also, Yandisa, add that when we opened the scheme, we were expecting to be inundated with applications, and we actually are not, and I'm hoping from this call here, by tomorrow we'll start seeing applications flocking in, because the money is still there. Let people apply and then they'll get the assistance.
So I think everyone on the call, you've heard the business recovery program, the funds are still there. People have not been applying. Well, they have, but it's not at the rate that the SEFA expected. So please, can you go out there? And this is the purpose of this webinar, is to educate people who may not have known of this information. So now that you know, if you're in Durban, you've been impacted. If you're in Joburg, also impacted by looting, please go onto the SEFA website and apply. Justin van Veek asked a very important question. There's so many of these government agencies